Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today we're talking about boundaries. It's the big boundary episode and how they are so challenging for people, particularly who have recovered from various forms of trauma, who have CPTSD or PTSD. It is, in fact, one of the most challenging parts of recovery and can carry with it a great deal of loss because you may have to cast aside relationships that you've had in the past when you had boundaries due to people violating them in you at a young age. And we're going to get to the heavy stuff in just a moment, but as usual, my intrepid friend Jacob has joined me again. Jacob Fluharty from Southern Style Readings. You can find him on Facebook at southernstylereadings.com, or you can contact him via email at southernstylereadings@gmail.com. And he's a great personal growth and healing reader as well, and I highly recommend him. And then you can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a life coaching session, a tarot card reading to help figure out what your life's purpose is. That's the type of reading that I do. I do predictive as well, but I really like to help people heal their stuff so that they can claim their power. And then you can always find me here at Logical Magic Examining Esoterica, and you can also find me at Chromecast at the Rising Moon on YouTube. I have a Patreon coming up. We're going to go back to doing the Spirit Guide Daily for the month of December. I'm not sure that this will be up in time to advertise that, but check that out Monday through Friday. Those are daily messages that will help you understand the energies that you are facing, and they will be moving to a Patreon or a membership level on YouTube at the beginning of January, because everybody's got to eat, and that includes me. Let's get talking about boundaries. So Jacob, boundaries and healing from trauma and growing up as an abuse survivor, you will always struggle with the concept of boundaries because yours were violated from an early age. Now, you were not sexually abused, were you?
Correct. No.
Okay. All right. So sexual abuse survivors, and I am one, and a lot of the people I talk to are, it's as likely to happen to boys as it is to people who identify as women. But it is actually found in young girls quite a bit. If your boundaries were violated by people, it's something that you have to go through kind of a logical process to heal, to understand what you owe to others and what you owe to yourself. And that's really what boundaries are about. They aren't about just yes and no. They're about protecting your energy and knowing that when you give to someone, it is not out of an obligation necessarily, but out of a choice. And in all of our relationships, there are choices to be made about what we will do to support others and what we owe to ourselves first. One of the things that we're struggling with as a world is that people who identify as women are absolutely programmed to believe that they do not have the right to boundaries, that they are meant to put others before them in a way that depletes self. Now, sometimes we will choose to put others before us, but it cannot be a way of life, or it causes all forms of dysfunction and mood regulation issues. The stereotype of the Karen that we see so often, people who flip out and have emotional regulation issues because they've been repressing all of their feelings and are trying to exert power over others because they feel so powerless in their own life, so that they try to wield it in a very abusive fashion against others, is one of the results of not understanding good boundaries and how to extend good treatment to yourself so that you know how to extend good treatment to others. And I will have a personal story about why this topic came up in the course of a healing journey, having to reevaluate boundaries and learn them. And you'll be bad at setting them at first, by the way. It's as awkward as trying to tap dance in the middle of a minefield when you start with it. But it's an incredibly necessary journey to learning how to preserve self, which when you understand yourself and you protect yourself and you take care of yourself, you're healthier. And that when you give to somebody, there's less resentment, less feeling of depletion, less feeling of being responsible for others when you make your first responsibility to yourself. Jacob, boundaries in you, how are you doing with them? How did your own journey start to encompass better and better boundaries? Because abuse survivors always struggle with this. It's normal, by the way. If you have, it's normal.
Well, I mean, it's like you said, healthy boundaries were never something that were established in my life growing up, right? And since I spent my entire life growing up as a people pleaser, boundaries for me personally were basically non-existent. Basically a floor mat my entire childhood and through most of my adulthood. because that was just the easiest way to go with the flow, right? You don't need personal boundaries because you need to respect everyone else's, needs or desires more than your own to keep the peace or whatever. Um, and granted, I guess I've displayed not being able to respect personal boundaries in others as well, in like relationships and whatnot. But yeah, it's difficult to try and find where your boundaries lie whenever you were never allowed to explore them and kind of build them along the way. And then whenever you're like an adult and trying to figure it out, it's like where do you even begin, right?
Mhm. And you pointed out something that is key to understanding it is that at the root of having boundaries, as somebody who suffered abuse, or quite frequently as women, is the pressure that is put on people to people please, to make others happy, even at the cost of yourself. Now, sometimes you will. Now, in the case of like motherhood in a healthy situation, you will choose to put your children first when they are young because they have that need, and that is part of an obligation that you took on, usually willingly. But we do have a very unhealthy approach to motherhood in the United States, in which we really prize the idea of this endlessly self-sacrificing person who always puts themselves last, never realizing that what you're really doing is programming the people in her care to look at that person as being a lesser form of life. And then it bleeds over into society and causes a reductive view of women in general. And it's not exclusive to women, as we're talking to you about. It happens in all walks of life, but it costs women in the professional circles more than it does men. Because if you learn that you're always taking second place, you're always behind somebody, it's really hard to believe in your own power. It's really hard to find your leadership. And conversely, like having focus entirely on self isn't healthy either. So learning how to find that healthy balance, and as part of a spiritual journey, it is called ego death, where you understand that you see yourself from a greater perspective. As Aziz put it in the yoga episode, it's seeing yourself with the small s self versus the capital S. But self has a place, because if you do not preserve self, you sooner or later you're burned out, you're depleted, you're bitter. And so you do have to figure out how to strike that balance. But it is a zigzag journey and an up and down seesaw as you try to figure it out. Most people's understanding of boundaries is about the ability to say no and have it be heard. But that is only one
Yeah.
element of boundaries. Can you give me any examples? Because I know one in your life recently that you had to come to terms with. And it had to do with the changing role where you work, and understanding that if you were going to be somebody's manager, that there was a depletion of the idea of being a friend, but that it would
Oh
make
yeah.
everybody's lives easier if you were in that, kind of reinforced and healthy boundaried state where you understood where you began and your job ended, where it's like you're not giving up all your personal time for it. How's your journey with boundaries been of late? Because you've been in a healthier and a healthier energy.
Oh yeah, sure. I went the not easy route of like promotion, where like sometimes they'll bring in someone from the outside, so it makes more sense, right? But at the restaurant that I'm at now, like I was a server for a long time, um, and I'm so sorry. And so whenever I took over, I had to kind of navigate those waters, right? Of, hey, these are all my friends. We've been working together at the same level for, a year and a half or whatever. And now y'all know way too much about me. And we, all these kinds of things. And so now I'm expected to just like be your boss and all this. And it was an interesting transition, and one I think will be ongoing as long as all of those staff members still work there. But after a little bit of a slippery slope. Basically, I just had to sit down and talk to them individually and just be like, hey, this is the new situation we find ourselves in. I'm sorry that there's a relationship dynamic shift, but at the same time, like, in order for all of us to do our jobs effectively and to basically, live in a more balanced state, we have to talk about this, and just pretty much just lay the boundaries out up front and just be like, hey, this is where we're at, and if you can respect that, then we can work forward in this new relationship dynamic. But if not, then that's a conversation we need to have.
You're like also shining a light on the very important part of learning how to communicate with yourself and communicate with others. And that's really where boundary setting begins, is in understanding and learning how to talk about your feelings with yourself so that you can understand them, and understanding that in your current role, in order to keep body and soul together and your dogs fed and the rent paid, that you needed to do this job well, and it would allow you to maintain your medical insurance, which is key to your mental health. And that there was a lot of good reasons in preserving self to start setting these boundaries. But the challenge is, if you have not had good boundaries modeled for you, then it becomes like you have to give yourself permission to suck at something as you begin. And that is the hardest part for people to understand, is that it's not going to be effortless. It's going to be a Herculean task at different points to start setting appropriate boundaries, both with yourself and with others. And if, most of the people in my collective, a lot of the people I'm trying to help heal from codependency, which I am codependent and I had to heal from it, and I've done a lot of work on it, and I'm in a really good place with it. But codependence is where you have, I almost want to say, fuzzy boundaries around an idea of self. Usually you define yourself in terms of your relationships, and it can be to family, it can be to friends, it can be to work. And if you invest too much of your identity in any of these exterior sources, you do not know yourself well, and your self-esteem becomes a mirror that is held up, that other people are reflecting back at you what you're supposed to feel about yourself. So this is why you want to learn how to set good boundaries, is because if you hand your self-esteem and your self-worth to these exterior roles, whether it's a husband or wife or friend or sister or brother or any of these things, that gives that other person a lot of control over your emotional well-being and your mental well-being. And so the reason to do this work is highly evident, but it can suck inside out as you're trying to do it. Now, Jacob, you are also codependent and had to recover from it. How do you find this in your personal relationships, having undergone so much recovery? Where do you find that, hey, I used to do this, but now I do this, and it's better, in terms of having learned better boundaries?
I mean, you were talking, I was just thinking, like, especially with family, that's when it's the most difficult for me personally. And I think it might be for a lot of people, especially in this like culture that we've grown up in, where it's like your parents are almost infallible, right? And you've got to defer to them in all areas. I only recently, in the past couple of years, have started trying to like build boundaries with my family, because it was weird, because, I've always had this great relationship with my family, and I know we were close and all these different things. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely diverged from my family in a lot of different ways, and the way that we see the world, the way that we, live our lives, etc. And I had to kind of reshape my relationship with my siblings and my parents, especially not necessarily like withholding information from them or things like that, but understanding that their values are not my values, and I have to have the boundary set for myself. That is, I can't allow their view of the world to make me feel bad about my view of the world. And that's been the biggest struggle, I think, for me personally, is finding a really good way of coming up with and enacting boundaries, and then sticking with them with my family, because I don't want to be seen negatively by them or cause any kind of waves or whatever. But at the same time, I have to live my most authentic life as well. And, if they want to be a part of that, then those boundaries are necessary.
And we have to remember, particularly with families, that if somebody grew up in a toxic or an abusive or an unhealthy environment, that through no fault of their own, they learned unhealthy patterns and then will repeat them until they have reason to change that. And that's what boundary setting is about, understanding that. And it's hard, because at first, when you're used to always being like, you owe this to other people, which is really where poor boundaries begin. I'm the child of two like inventively screwed up narcissists. I only grew up with my father until he died, and then I lived with my mother for just a few years. But my mother was kind of the queen of making sure that I understood that I was the least important person in the room. And it took me well into my adult life to understand, oh, she's a narcissist. Like, literally all she ever does is talk about herself and how great she is and how she's the hero of every story. And it really took me a long time to understand that that meant that the view she had given me of the type of person that I was not accurate. It was actually like just kind of her agenda influenced it, because everything needed to be about her. And she had been an only child, and my father had been an only child. And it was just a little bit of a recipe for disaster. But I had incredibly crappy boundaries. And if you were abused, or if you were bullied, if you were sexually abused in particular, you're going to struggle with understanding where boundaries are. And I'm going to point out one thing that our society does not help, particularly when it comes to people who identify as women, because we are encouraged to view our worth through the lens of, will people think I'm nice? Will people think, like, what other people think of you determines who you are, versus your intent, your authentic self, and what you're trying to be in this world. And sometimes you can be as generous as you can when you have extra energy. And sometimes you will have to say no, because you have to prioritize your own needs. And the pushback that we can receive on that in people who identify in any of the fluid gender streams, because here's the reason that I'm always on about gender. I've never had any gender dysphoria. I know full well that I identify completely as a woman. The whole female thing, I'm kind of delicate looking. I look very feminine as well. But I do not have many of the typical feminine traits, because I was raised in such isolation. So I had very little social programming jarred into me. Even as a kid, I was in this like academically talented program that only had 10 people in it. And I was the one that they picked on. So I was always the one on the outside. And was I a slightly weird little kid? Sure. Like I was, my father, he never went to the bathroom. He went to the lavatory. This is how this man spoke in northeastern Pennsylvania. And this was the environment I was in. So I was always just a little bit weird. And it served me quite well, in that I spent, when I talk about being isolated as a kid, I mean, I was in an 8-bedroom house that was almost entirely empty, because my mother had wanted this grand house and pressured my father into borrowing money from his mother to put a down payment on it. And the damn thing was empty. And so it was super, super, super creepy. But it meant that I was almost always by myself. And because people were so afraid of my father, I did not actually have a lot of playmates either, because he was violent and scary and clearly not well. And so I was the kid that like nobody was supposed to play with either. And so I was genuinely very, very isolated. And as a result, I do not do some of the things that are typically associated with being a woman that hold women back, which includes thinking that when you have a feeling, you just want somebody else to hear it to validate it. And I don't do that. And it causes problems within my friendships, because I don't need people to just listen to me and then I feel better. Instead, I know how to listen to me and make myself feel better through a long healing journey. And I'm going to tell you guys a story, and I gave Jacob a heads up about this. It's going to take a couple of minutes, but it's worthwhile in illustrating how difficult the journey towards setting boundaries really can be. I have a long-term friend who was a friendship that was born in interests. So we both liked books, and we both liked movies, and we liked to get together for critical analysis of that. I also I have a tendency to like friendships where there's we talk about psychology and a whole bunch of things, but that I'm not really a chit chatty type of person. And this friend had been in my life for a very long time, but her life kept getting worse and worse, even as I was going through things. And like I said, I handle my own stuff. And not that long ago, after a long illness, and before I even say this, please understand the value of animals in our lives cannot be overstated. The bond that we form with our pets is real. It is true. The type of grief that people experience when they lose a pet is profound. And I am not in any way questioning that. Having said that, my friend is incredibly codependent and would not identify herself that way. She's been single her whole life, and so she would not think in terms of being dependent on her peripheral relationships to fill the role of a partner that she never had. But she does have this tendency. And so over the years, less and less would we talk about these interests that we had, which was my investment in the friendship, although I cared about her very deeply as a person. And more, because she was socialized to believe that I feel bad, I need to talk to somebody. And it's no, you actually need to understand your feelings so you can take care of them so you can feel better. It's they took that part of the process away from women to keep them always in a very emotional state and never healing those emotions, understanding them, or fixing the situation. Whereas in our society, we say that men are very solution oriented, but women just want to be heard. And it's you have been programmed to believe that. You have been programmed to believe that you're not there to solve your problems, but rather to have somebody else validate them by being like, I hear you. And there's a role for that. There's a role for that. Sometimes we all get overwhelmed and we need somebody else to listen to us. But primarily, we need to understand what's going on with us, because that is in the heart of the responding, not reacting, which is the heart of boundaries as well, where you respond to what's going on with you with the appropriate self-care. And if you're responding to what's going on within you with the appropriate self-care, then you have less need of others, you get more done, and you are healthier and you are happier. But my friend, after a long illness, lost her cat. And it was a long and arduous thing. And I don't want to give too many identifying details, but there had been an accident. And in the 16th year of this cat, who would die at 17, the cat lost a leg, making my friend a caretaker all the time, all the time. And was there choice involved on her part? Absolutely. But I've never begrudged her that choice. She wanted to focus her time, her energy on that particular area because she is actually codependent and not realizing it. She has a disproportionate level of connection to her pets, and they become as people to her. And I don't question that at all. By the same token, when I lose a pet, I know that it is actually part of the bargain that we take on when we have animals, that unfortunately we will outlive them and it will rip a hole in our hearts, but it is part of the bargain. So her cat died. She announced it on Facebook. I commented, I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm running 4 different types of business right now. And my son had actually been transferred across the country, which represented a big loss to me. And it was during that time period, Jacob, that you know about, where it was a 6-week period where every single day it was like the universe was like, we're testing out your method for dealing with triggers. And like some of them were inventively strange. Like I went to restart my computer and it wouldn't recognize the keyboard and the mouse afterwards. I'm like, what do I even do? I can't communicate with it. I figured it out. But over and over again, it was like stressors falling on my head. And this happened right at that particular point. So I comment, I'm so sorry for your loss. I look and there are 60 plus people offering her support. And because she has a tendency to emotionally dump on me if I offer her support, I moved on. I was like, oh, thank God, she's well taken care of. I'll circle back in like 6 weeks, let the worst of the grief pass, because she grieves like Queen Victoria. Like she really does. She just goes into weeds and she's a very emotional person. Being too emotional around other people gives them a way to control you. And so I've always been like, tend to be a little bit stoic about my feelings. It's an area we've never matched. 6 weeks go by and she posts about something else that she would like support with. And I offer her support and she gets back to me and she's furiously angry with me. And I already knew she was angry with me because 2 days after her cat died, Facebook informed me that she had unsent the message. And she had a long history of being triggered and being abusive towards me. But I know that she has had a very rough existence and I just kind of accepted it. And this is where I start to be in the wrong with the boundary issue, because I've been letting it go on because I felt sorry for her, which I have a long history of allowing that, of allowing people to use me as their personal punching bag because they're upset. And so that was where like I needed to draw the line and I didn't. And it happened with increasing frequency as her life got worse and worse. So I replied to her that I quite simply did not have the support to give her at that time and was relieved that others did. And for 2 days, she bombarded me with messages telling me that I was this terrible person and she's not my best friend. I'm not in her family. She wouldn't refer to me as her best friend. And at the end of day 2, I had taken 4 days off, very burned out, tired, running for different businesses. I was going to bed that night, having stood up for myself over and over again, saying, listen, I can't be support on demand for you. And I had told her like I couldn't do it and that was not good enough. So she's like bombarding me with these messages. And I finally was lying there in bed waiting for the next one to come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I realized I can't do this anymore. And so I sent her a message saying, hey, listen, I wish you well. I hope you heal, but I have to block you and unfriend you. And that is actually, it ended a very long friendship.
Oh, yeah.
And it sucked a little bit. And it allowed me to confront something, which is that none of my primary relationships from the long period that I was married to my narcissistic ex-husband survived, because I had been kind of conditioned to accept other people taking their moods out on me from the time I was born. And it was like the last piece to fall into place in the boundary puzzle, was understanding that I can't do that any longer. Like everybody can have a bad moment, but if they repeat the behavior, because this was about the 7th instance with her of her, because she was having a completely disproportionate response to me not writing a supportive note to her upon the death of her cat. And please understand, I get that the grief is profound. If I went into how much was going on, it would be like, oh, wow, no wonder. It was really, really difficult. I had a lot of different things going on, and I wasn't asking anybody for support because I was getting my stuff done. And she could not accept that as an answer, and so I had to end the friendship. And that is the difficult part about boundaries, is that if somebody will not hear no from you, then you have to let them go. And that is the hardest part
Yeah.
about all of this, because we don't like loss. We are conditioned to fear change in this world. Now, the friendships I have great friendships. And they're good and healthy ones. Jacob, what have you lost to boundaries? And because on a healing journey, we will find a bunch of crossroads, and we will have to enact things like I just described, where it's like, I cannot get you to hear me. I cannot get you to respect that I'm not a slot machine. You can't pull a lever and I will puke out support for you. Because there's one more detail I want to add to make people understand this.
Hmm.
It would not just be offering her sympathy. She takes it as an invitation to emotionally purge on somebody. As the last time that I spoke to her, we had gotten together to speak about something particular, and she ended up talking to me for 2 hours straight about being disappointed about being left out of a family photograph. And I wasn't too weird about it. I put the phone on speaker and was cleaning my office, because it's like, well, there's clearly something more going on here, because this is a weird and disproportionate response. She was in a meeting, they didn't interrupt her, and she was very, 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 very upset about that in a disproportionate manner, as people who have
Hmm.
CPTSD are. So that's the difficult road that you sometimes have to walk when you're trying to learn to set boundaries, is that you have to pay attention to the response of the other person as to whether or not they can see your own point of view. Because there really isn't any question. She had so many people supporting her, and I was doing all my own stuff.
Hmm.
But it did mean I have to end this friendship, because you can't hear no and understand that it's like, oh, she had a lot going on. I'm okay. She doesn't have a
Hmm.
responsibility to take care of me. But we, in our
Hmm.
society, we program women to believe that is our responsibility, to care for others. And it causes codependency, because people don't have a firm sense of self. So in your own journey, like, what's changed around you? Because like, I can think of your relationship before this one where boundaries became an issue as well.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we talk about that a lot. F- I guess even just like outside of that same story, I always go back to. I've always said that what people's opinions of me are none of my business, right? It's kind of like this mindset that I've been trying to move forward with. And so one of the boundaries that I've also been trying to work on here recently is not trying to expend too much effort in changing people's opinion of me. I may have told you, I don't know if I did, because it was kind of inconsequential. Like, there were a couple of friends that I've lost here recently after the whole manager shakeup at work, because of,
Mhm.
interpersonal relationships, and this being a small city and everyone knowing each other. And so I've gotten messages from people who have been like, no, you are a terrible person. What you did was wrong, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't know the whole story, and you have decided to attack me based on this, like, whatever opinion of me. My last relationship, yeah, he liked to tell a bunch of stories about me. So people have very incorrect, understanding of who I am and what, I do or stand for or whatever. But basically, I've kind of just stopped trying to convince people that I am the person that I think that I am, like, it's not worth it for me, I guess, at the end of the day, to expend that much energy to try and change someone's mindset about me, because I live a pretty openly authentic life. I don't really feel like I am too duplicitous outside of my, normal Gemini, whatever. But no, I kid, obviously. But no, so like, yeah, I don't take the time to do that anymore. If you're gonna come to the table and you're gonna have this mindset that you whatever, then I'm just like, okay, you take that and you run with it, baby, because I've got not enough spoons to deal with it, and I have enough friends that see the authentic me that I don't really need to spend my time convincing you of whatever. Like,
Oh, hey, when you
it is
just
what.
referred to something so effing important that people understand that I'm going to like shine a light on it. What do you mean by I don't have enough spoons? Because I know exactly what you mean, but it is something that
Oh yes,
I can't.
spoon theory. The easiest way to describe it, I guess, is just like think of your emotional well-being, like well-being, just like your self, emotional self. And you have like this drawer of spoons, and like you may have friends who or need something from you, like emotional support or something like that. And then you would say, okay, so I'm giving up some of my spoons, to this person so that they have enough spoons to deal with what they're doing. But at the end of the day, you only have so many spoons in your silverware drawer, right? So you can only give so many away before you don't have anything to eat with. And
Mhm.
so you have to be mindful of how many spoons you're carrying that day. So like your story is a good example of that as well. You were using all of your spoons to eat, right? You had all these different, pokers in the
I was
fire and
handling
you
my
had
own
a lot
crap.
going on. You just didn't have enough to give. Exactly. And there's nothing wrong. And I think that's the other thing that, people get torn up about is there's nothing wrong with not having enough to give to somebody else
Right.
and using it for yourself to get through whatever you're going through. It does not make you a bad person. Does not mean you let that other person down. Just means you only have a finite amount of resources to give. And it's like put your mask on before you help others, on the airplane. You can't help someone else if you have nothing yourself. So
And these are
you always
all
got to be mindful of your spoons and how many you got.
it's like it's the perfect analogy for like to help people visualize what we're talking about, because part of the reason I had to determine to end the friendship was again 2 days in on a 4-day off thing that I was exhausted on, and I was like, I'm going to end up depleted at the end of this, which will like just make me enter my next working period exhausted. And then also she had a bunch of stuff coming up that made it clear that it's like, no, I need to be very clear about what she can reasonably expect from me. And then thirdly, and just kind of importantly, to the idea of boundaries and understanding that what other people think of you cannot be as important to you as what you think of you. And we do, like, I encourage people to hold themselves to standards and to examine themselves, and that whole like never speak to yourself negatively. Hey, listen, you can hold yourself accountable without being a jerk to yourself. Sometimes I am my own worst enemy.
Yeah,
This
for
morning I
sure.
went to the Botanic Garden and like was raging on the way over there because I had all this pent up anger over something, probably that situation I'm referring to. Got it out, felt much better, but did it in a productive way that helped me rather than harmed me. But you have to
Hmm.
have a very clear view of, even if some, because she was, trying to make me feel guilty for saying no. And that's the biggest red flag that is humanly possible. If somebody
Oh
cannot
yeah, yeah.
hear no from you, they don't belong in your life. And then
Hmm.
if you become overly concerned with what others think of you, then you will, it's a no-win game. It's a Mobius strip of
Yeah.
effort, because then they can play a game of keep away with your self-esteem. And so that's
Oh yeah.
honestly what boundaries are really about, is understanding self. And when you will determine that I have plenty of spoons and I do care about you and I can give you 3 and only have 1, and that's the choice I'm making because you're in a time of need. And you can do that. It's not always a equal thing. It's not in every single moment that equality will exist, but overall there needs to be an equal balance. And then as you discovered in your relationship to being a manager at work, if you didn't learn how to not care about people viewing you as a friend first instead of an employer, everybody was going to suffer because the business wouldn't run well, and that it would
Right. Yeah.
jeopardize you and it would jeopardize their employment and it would put other people in jeopardy if you did not have firm boundaries around, this is my work role and being my friend is a personal role. And I
Hmm.
run
Hmm.
into that with my clients all the time. I have a couple of really, really nice people who like really, they don't seem to understand that outside of my work, I talk about my interests. So if you're texting me
Hmm.
about tarot and magic and things after hours, you're actually just texting me about work. And I've stopped replying to work texts after hours to try and just be like, to not, because the other thing is sometimes you don't need to say no. No answer is an answer sometimes. And
Right. Yeah.
and having to set the boundary of like, listen, it's not about not liking you, but you kind of want to be my friend. You want to be friends with what I do. And you might
Hmm.
not view it that way, but that's what you're doing. And there's a couple of people who like are probably hearing this going, oh, and it's like, please don't feel hurt by that. It's that I had to learn how to keep things in their appropriate utensil drawer.
Yeah, of course.
Separating
Yeah.
the forks and the knives and the spoons. Work life is knives, personal life is spoons, and then forks is probably the stuff that I need to do for self-care. But
Right.
start approaching ourselves as you are your own responsibility first, which is the cure for codependence. There literally is only one. It is independence. Learning self-reliance, learning self-understanding, learning self-care. And my friend, who's a very good person on many levels, I guess my former friend, I should be saying, never learned that. All of that time and energy she was
Yeah.
putting into taking care of her poor old cat, her health was suffering, her finances were suffering. And on top of everything else, part of the reason I didn't send her much of a note afterwards was I didn't want to fake feeling something for her benefit. And it wasn't that
Hmm.
I didn't have sympathy, it was more that I could see the ways in which it's like, well, you can take all that energy. And I did actually tell her that, like, I hope that you turn all of that caretaking energy towards yourself because, you deserve it. Learn how to take care of you. And I'm sure it wasn't fun to hear. And I'm sure that, like, you had to learn with the people who judged a situation, which I know the situation, we're not going to go into it. There's
Right.
literally doubt here that you were in the right.
Hmm.
Honest to goodness, the other person does not have a history of telling the truth. And so clearly, like, went around making themselves out to be a victim and painting you as a villain. And you had to be like, fine, have me as a villain in your story as long as I
Right. Yeah,
am.
it's not worth it.
Exactly. And those are boundaries too, is understanding that what somebody who doesn't even know you thinks of you is inconsequential if it does not matter to you.
Right.
And good boundaries are about learning to not let it matter to you. Now, there are going to be, like, obviously, there are times that some boundaries need to be set aside. I once harassed somebody to help their sister because she was an addict who had relapsed multiple times and she had two small children under the age of 5 and was actively relapsing. And I knew about it. And I was like, I do not care what's going on in your life. You get up off your butt and you go towards her and you give her support because her children are at risk and they're your family members and they need to be protected.
Hmm.
And that can be an issue of firm boundaries are not made out of concrete. They're made out of logic. They're made out of
Right. Yeah.
examining a situation to be like, yeah, no, I should probably make sure that 5-year-old doesn't get molested by a drug dealer. And I'm not laughing
Right.
because
Nothing's
I'm
ever
laughing because
like
it's possible and horrible.
right. Yeah. Nothing's ever that black or white in this world, right? Like sometimes you have to, yes,
It's a
go past your
piece of cake.
energetic depletion moment sometimes, right? Yeah. Especially in the service of others. If it's, yes.
And it is a case by case basis. That's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
people really need to understand about the concept of boundaries is that you will have a standard for how you will treat yourself and how you will treat others. And sometimes you will have to choose to run yourself ragged, but it needs to be a choice, not an obligation. Meaning that it's
Hmm.
every now and then, like I said, small children involved, the care of pets involved, things that cannot look out for themselves involved. Listen, we all have to set aside, like, I'm putting me first. It's like, no, I have an obligation to this person through choice, through connection. We do have to have I don't want to say a good, healthy give and take, because boundaries sound like a wall that we build around ourselves, but it's a flexible wall that at different points can be in different areas, and that the people who belong in your life can hear, I kind of don't have that to give to you right now. And they'll say, okay, I hope you feel better. And they'll move on. But if you're saying to somebody, I
Hmm.
didn't have something to give to you, and they're responding with that makes you a bad person, it's like, that, no, I think you're asserting that probably makes you somebody with something to heal, because
Yeah.
other people don't owe us things just because we want stuff from them.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And
No
let's think.
matter the like dynamic of your relationship, you don't necessarily owe anything to anybody. Like
Right.
that's it.
Well, and the only reason I keep going back to this is it's the example that I'm using. But my friend wanted to look to me because I'm good at it. And that's why, even though I'm not her best friend and I'm not in her family and things, that's why it was very important for her to get support from me. Because I do this for a living and people are always like, hey,
Right.
I feel so much better after I talk to you because I have healing energy. And so I understood why. But the insistence that because I possessed a particular gift meant that she needed to be able to call upon it when she was in need, it's like, but I was in need and I have to prioritize me first. And so she was looking to me for the level of support that you can only find in people who are in a committed partnership with you. And that's why it's an issue of like, well, that's technically thrown off a red flag for codependency. You are, in fact, a single woman, but you are demanding that somebody owes you support because you need it. And it's like, no, we didn't stand before any authority and make any type of vow. I have to prioritize me. And it is a difficult thing that women in particular, but people in general, do not know how to do that and like not have it tip over into narcissism where all they do is prioritize themselves or self-interest, that they don't understand that it's a fluid structure, that at some points it's like, yeah, I have enough to give to you, I can absolutely make your stuff my priority right now because things are going pretty smoothly and you're not, you're suffering and I need to help you, but it can't be a way of life. Needing from others can't be a way of life. And whenever the word need comes into play, codependency, which can exist on like, it's a fluid thing. Like some people can have it at a very high level, some people not at all. And when I refer to myself as having to recover from codependency, please understand I've always been one of the most emotionally independent people because I grew up in such isolation. So I was never asking for support from anybody. My codependency existed solely in wanting somebody else to help keep me safe because I had been so unsafe. But I handled all my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was at there are different degrees of things. It was
Mm-hmm.
only about safety and learning to provide my own safety that I really needed to. But for a lot of people, codependency exists in understanding that if somebody else is denying their approval of your actions, then you learn to feel guilty. We control, particularly women, with guilt and shame a great deal. And that is the
Mm-hmm.
thing that you will encounter as you are trying to set boundaries in personal relationships. Your biggest one was in professional ones, and people can only push so far. The worst stuff, like in your family that has had some dynamics in it that we've talked about, have you had any difficulties in people understanding that it's like, I get to heal and change without it being something that you should attack me for?
Like in my family, not really. I think that everyone is just kind of like, we all understand, like when we are together in person for like an event or like we just all get together for, just to see each other, the dynamic is perfect. Everything is great. We may not talk about everything that's going on in our lives, aka I don't always talk about everything that's going on in my life, but like our relationship is probably as healthy as it's ever been. I just had to learn to give up certain that sounds bad, it's not as bad as it's coming off, I promise. Give up certain things, like whenever we talked about like when my brother had his bachelor party and I was the only one that wasn't invited, like that kind of hurt, but at the same time I was like, well, but like, doesn't it make sense though? Like you're experiencing this new boundary with your family, like it once you stop to think about it, it made complete sense. So but yeah, with it hasn't really been like a difficult process or like one that has breeded any kind of any kind of negativity.
Would you
It's
mind
just a new normal for us.
would you mind telling us why it made perfect sense? Because this is the stuff people like
What do you
odd
mean as
life
far
lessons, not being invited to the bachelor party, learning to set new boundaries.
because I had kind of built that wall between me and my family in certain aspects. So like I don't talk to my brothers, like, so they all talk pretty regularly and I don't talk to them very regularly. One, because that's not a need of mine, but two, it's just because like we are very different adults as well, so like we don't really have that much to talk about.
Right.
So it made sense that it could have even just been like an oversight, even maybe even if it was, that's fine too, because it's just like our dynamic is different, so that's
Is your
just.
dynamic different because they're your brothers or your half brothers? Is like, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's true, but like that was never a dynamic that was given to us. Like we like
Gotcha.
growing up, we're all just like there was never any distinction. Probably mostly because there's just me and then the youngest who have different dads, and everyone else in the middle all have the same dad. So
Mhm.
it would have been weird to like label me as the other, I guess,
Right.
especially like in the beginning. So maybe that was part of it, but like even just like across my family, that's never been a thing. Once you're married into or whatever, you're just family, and that's all there is to it. So I don't know.
Yeah, you guys are Southern,
That's
so
nice
that
about
makes a
our.
lot of sense.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
The
that's a nice thing
reason
about our family, at least.
the reason that I really wanted to go into that is that like it does actually make sense. It's like, well, a bachelor party, you want the people that you're going to have a really good time with. You want your best friends there, and if you guys don't talk very frequently, it's like you could have had very hurt feelings and really brooded over it and be like and felt very victimized, like excluded. But instead, you
Right.
look at it and you're like, no, it actually makes sense, and that's cool. I'm kind of busy anyway. And
Right, and I was exactly like I couldn't have taken off for that weekend, and
right.
then it just created an obligation. Then I would, exactly. So like it all worked out the way it was supposed to. It was just
What one of the things about boundaries, and it is one of the thing to remember that can help you, it's a tool like to put into the idea of how do I start understanding that, is understanding that what other people do is almost always about what they're feeling and how they're viewing something, and it usually doesn't have a lot to do with you. That like even if they're aiming it at you, that's called projection. Just like my poor friend who I
right.
genuinely care about, the reason she was so angry with me is she has a lot going on in her life. And I have been in the past, since I have allowed, and this is on me. I should have put a stop to it years ago. I should have put a stop to it years ago. I didn't call her out on the many times that she's had a disproportionate response and become personally insulted towards me. And I just kind of shut down, and it doesn't because as an abuse survivor, I'm used to that part. But in the aftermath, I had to examine it. It's like, well, that was all pretty bad, but what role did I play in letting it get this bad? And that the role was right there, is that for the 2 hours that she was talking to me about the family photograph, I probably should have started making noises around the half hour to be like, okay, well, we're going to talk about the thing we actually got together for. Like that I had me not asserting something is what allowed that to be taking advantage of my time. As a
Mhm.
for instance, that sometimes, and when we talk about someone taking advantage of somebody else, it is people can only take advantage of you if you do not assert a boundary. And like I said, if somebody can't hear a boundary from you, then they're either in a space where they have something to heal, or they're not willing to consider your viewpoint. And if somebody's not willing to consider your viewpoint, they're in their own headspace, they're in their feelings, and you need to let it go because it's not about you. Sometimes, even when somebody is aiming insults right at your head, which, like I said, I just withstood that not that long ago from this particular situation, is that you have to be able to let it go, going like, yeah, I get it. You're disappointed with every single area of your life, and you're used to me receiving that energy and making you feel better. But I can't do that. And
Right.
when you hit I can't do that, instead of falling back into that means I'm failing somehow, that means that I'm doing it wrong, I'm not there enough for other people. My whole life is about trying to help other people. It's something I've really genuinely prioritized, trying to help people heal so that they can find their life's purpose, so they can experience more joy, so they can get rid of their pain. But that doesn't mean I don't matter in my own life. And one of the ways to understand, by the way, when you start healing, expect it to be a clumsy process. The first time you have to say no and really stick to it, it's going to be too emphatic. It's going to be pushing back somebody too hard. When your boundaries are too close in, and here's why you want to have good boundaries. If you have your boundaries like you're depleted, but I'm still giving, I'm still giving, I'm still getting, by the time that you call a stop to it, you disproportionately react and you lash out at other people. And I've done that in the past. That's what my friend has done, is that she did not have the ability to say, I need my energy for me and to take care of my own stuff when it came to multiple things in her life. And so she was depleted. She was depleted. When something disappointed her, she reacted so disproportionately that she
Mhm.
cost herself a 20-year friendship. And here's the thing, we're all prone to that. Please stop making it about being ashamed of not being in a super healthy space, because there's no reason to be ashamed. Not being willing to heal is denial, but not being healed is just human. And learning how to heal your stuff improves every single relationship that you have. Like, Jacob, you have to go like really soon because you've got other obligations as well. And when you texted me that this morning, like, I responded with, "Hey, it's cool." And when we started here, we were like, "Hey, do we need to do this differently so you can get out of here?" And then we both determined that, like, no, we can just push on through.
Yeah.
So before you heal, expect to have a difficult process around boundaries and expect some relationships to change or potentially end.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them
Mm-hmm.
end. Some of them just change. Because some people can hear no and go, "Yeah, no, I heard that." And they just move right on. But when you're healed, the type of friendships and the type of relationships that you have, if you tell somebody I can't do something, then they should receive it in the, "Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. It's not a big deal." Because they know how to take care of their own stuff. And it's because the they becomes you. You know how to take care of your own stuff. You don't have a need of other people because you're meeting your own needs. When you do set boundaries, it's very, very comfortable. Like in the case of like potentially, and I've had to do this with multiple people, not replying to after hours texts until it's a working time. And like also like I used to state that, "Hey, I've like kind of made a policy. I just don't reply to work texts after hours." And now I just don't reply. Like, it's like, honest to goodness, giving yourself permission not to justify yourself at every turn that's part of having healthy boundaries. You're not always in a defensive position. You're just standing in your safe space, knowing how to maintain it. And that's really what boundaries are ultimately about, is learning how to maintain and protect your emotional safety. But it doesn't mean you'll never give to somebody. Like, you are one of those people that if you were in a bad space and you were texting me at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd turn on the light and be texting right back. You've been a really good
Which you
friend.
have, yes.
Well, yeah, it's happened, dude. And like, that's part of friendship. But it's not happening every Tuesday or something,
Yeah,
like,
no, oh, Jesus.
right? It's like, that's the thing that people have to understand, is that it is not a black or white issue. It exists in a moment to moment, where am I with something, and not feeling hurt or angered or like as if you have to pick up a sword to defend your life. When somebody steps over a boundary, it's really just kind of like, you're fine with it. Like, you either ignore it, like in the case of not replying to texts, or you are very accepting of other people having to do their own stuff as their priority so that they can keep their whole life together. And we did the narcissism episode, which, like, I really enjoyed talking about that. And this is the other side of narcissism, is learning where self-care is. And like, I'll have to do an episode on self-care and like how to talk to yourself and self-love and all that. But the boundary issue starts with learning how to say no to other people, learning how to say no to yourself, so that you can examine, like, what am I really doing here? Am I looking to other people to help me with something I'm fully capable of doing myself because I don't have enough confidence in myself? And that was me. Like, as a person who, like I said, as a kid, my mother would literally start beating me and calling me stupid if I made a mistake. And I'm talking stupid stuff like putting my pants on backwards as a 7-year-old. That's like one of my most vivid memories. Delightful. It left me with a lack of confidence in my ability to do anything well, when in reality, like, almost anything that I turn my attention to and I try, I improve on it and I get really good at it. And so that's the gift of boundaries as well. Jacob, in your own journey, what have you learned about yourself that has improved with learning to set good boundaries? Because there's so many improvements. It's not just all picking up swords and fighting off people and blocking people. It's
Yeah.
learning to have better flow.
Yeah, and then learning about, like when you first met me, I believe I've come a long way in my like drinking and like other activity, all those like self-medicating activities that I was involved in whenever you and I first met.
Mhm.
I don't know, that seems to have lessened, like my ability to control those kinds of behaviors has become much better, because I feel like, I guess maybe I'm just not have less to medicate about, since I'm not as constantly worried all the time about like situations or people, because like I have those boundaries now. um yeah, I don't know, I guess I'm just doing a lot better overall. But personal health wise, yeah, I think that was kind of the thing I've noticed the most. Like I've lost a lot of weight recently. Like I've still drinking, but not like the way it used to be.
Yeah,
And
no.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of that has to do with, I guess, just doing the work. I'm back in therapy. I'm on my meds. Trying to exercise good boundaries, and so yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's had a positive uh, kind of turnover in a lot of different ways in my life.
Like, and I read for you sometimes, and you're like, the energy that comes off of your cards when it comes to your personal relationships is entirely different, and it's very
I'm about to
clear.
say, right? We haven't seen that devil card follow me around in a long time, I feel like.
Right. And like the same thing for me. We like Jacob and I have, it's almost like, if codependency recovery is like addiction recovery, it really is like we've sponsored each other or something, because like we've been through this healing journey and gotten healthier and healthier. And that's the worth of it. Please understand that these difficult things that you have to learn in order to inhabit a healthier energy are worthwhile, because it adds so much peace to your life, and you give your energy to the things in your life that need your attention. And when you're doing that, when you do give, you give it a higher level and in a healthier energy. It means,
That's a much better way of saying that. Yeah.
right, it really just, it really serves everybody involved, including like, you don't have to worry about people not liking you because you won't do for them any longer, because you understand that's not why people are in your life and you're in theirs. Is like, you and I, like, I talked to like about, I love my friendships to be able to talk about stuff. That's part of the reason I love our friendship, is we like to do deep dives on pretty, like, deep subjects. And that's why for me it's like a really, really good friendship. Now, am I still in that runner energy where clearly I need to learn how to share my feelings a little bit more? Sure, but I'm working on it. I set a rule where if somebody like asks me how I am, because I never used to answer, how are you? I'm good. And then I move right on. In fact, I try to redirect. Now I'm like, I have a rule where I answer with 2 sentences at least. Start telling people how you really are. Like, it doesn't have to be all the details or anything. But that's how, like, used to being in the last position in my own life I was that I wasn't even comfortable telling people who I was, but now how I am. Now I am. And
Hmm.
these are the things that you gain. You are not losing anything, even if you have to set aside some relationships, because with good boundaries, you gain a good relationship to self. Any closing thoughts here, my friend? Because I know you got a boogie.
No, just like I feel like I say often, just be patient with yourself, and you can only do what you can do. But any step forward is still a positive step.
And please understand that absolutely every single person that you meet is like, they are trying to do their own stuff or not trying to do their own stuff. They may be exhibiting the energies or the symptoms of something, but stop comparing yourself to others and just do your own work, and your life gets better. Because that's the thing I really see in your life, is how much better your life has gotten over the course of 2 years. In the
Mm.
time that like things like went from being really crappy to being like much better, and the relationships in your life have gotten better as well. And like my own life, like I'm happier and happier every day, even if I still like am learning to offload my feelings in a way that's more productive instead of stuffing them down. There's worth in doing this work, and it gives you a greater connection to self, and then it gives you a greater connection to your intuition, and then it gives you a greater connection to the divine. There is, even arduous things, even difficult processes, the yield on them, even though it is not immediate, because patience is the thing that we all have to learn, even though the yield is not immediate, it is unquestionable as you live in a healthier and a clearer and a more resilient energy, because that is what good boundaries will give you, is resiliency in your own energy, the ability to cope and the ability to master. Everybody, this has been Logical Magic, examining Esoterica. That was the big boundary talk that Jacob was brave enough to join me for. You can find him at Southern Style Readings on Facebook.com. Remember, in episodes, on the video ones are always up on my YouTube channel, and then on the audio ones, there's always a description below, and it's always going to have the links for guests. Southern Style Readings at Facebook.com. And then you can reach him via email, southernstylereadings@gmail.com. And then I'm at therisingmoon.com, the only way to book me for anything. I'm Chromecast at The Rising Moon on YouTube. You can always find me here at Logical Magic, examining Esoterica. And in 2024, we've got a Patreon coming with a huge variety of weird things, including guided meditations, the Spirit Guide Daily, learning some magic, talking about the moon stuff. It's all going to be good. Thanks again for joining us. Take care. Be well. Have good boundaries. Know that you have the right to say no.